The discussion began with Ellen asking about retirement and volunteer work. She was highlighting people who had found meaningful ways to give back to their communities after finishing their primary careers. She'd already talked to a retired police officer who now taught safety classes at elementary schools, and a former engineer who built wheelchair ramps for disabled veterans. But when she noticed a woman in row 10 who had the patient, nurturing demeanor of someone who had spent years working with people, she had no idea that the next few minutes would reveal one of the most innovative approaches to community service and homeless advocacy she'd ever encountered. "Ma'am, you have the look of someone who worked in education," Ellen called out, pointing to a woman who appeared to be in her early 60s. "Were you a teacher?" The woman stood up with the graceful posture of someone who had spent decades managing classrooms and inspiring young minds. She had silver-gray hair styled in a practical bob, warm blue eyes behind reading glasses, and the kind of calm, welcoming presence that immediately made people feel comfortable. "Yes, I was," she replied, her voice carrying the clear, patient tone of an experienced educator. "I'm Margaret Phillips, and I taught elementary school for 38 years before retiring 4 years ago." "Margaret, 38 years in education. That's an incredible career. Are you enjoying retirement?" Margaret's expression became more complex, carrying both satisfaction and a sense of ongoing purpose. "Well, I'm not exactly retired from helping people learn and grow. I just do it in a different setting now." Ellen tilted her head, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I volunteer at the Central Library downtown. Officially, I help with literacy programs and research assistance. But I've discovered that libraries serve a much broader purpose in our community than most people realize." The studio audience was paying attention, sensing there was more depth to this story than typical volunteer work. "What kind of broader purpose?" Margaret paused, seeming to consider how much to share. "I've learned that for many people experiencing homelessness, the library is more than just a place to read books. It's a sanctuary, a place where they can access computers, use restrooms, escape the weather, and feel human." Ellen felt her interest sharpen as she understood Margaret was describing something beyond standard library services. "And what do you do with that knowledge?" "I help them navigate systems they need to rebuild their lives. I assist with job applications, help them access social services, guide them through paperwork for housing assistance, healthcare enrollment, disability benefits, things that are incredibly difficult to manage when you don't have a stable address or reliable internet access." The studio began to quiet as people understood that Margaret was describing a comprehensive support system she had created within the library. Ellen made a decision that would transform this conversation into something much more significant. "Margaret, would you come down here and tell us more about this?" Margaret made her way down to the stage, and Ellen noticed how she moved with the confident efficiency of someone who had spent decades helping people solve problems and overcome challenges. Once they were seated in the interview area, Ellen asked the question that would reveal the full scope of Margaret's library-based advocacy. "Margaret, when you say you help people navigate systems, can you give me some specific examples?" "Well, there's Robert, a veteran who had been living on the streets for 2 years after losing his job and apartment. He came to the library to use the computers, but he was overwhelmed by online job applications and had no idea how to access VA benefits he was entitled to." Ellen leaned forward, completely absorbed in Margaret's storytelling. "I spent weeks working with him, helping him fill out applications, teaching him basic computer skills, connecting him with VA services. Robert now has stable housing and a part-time job at a hardware store." "That's incredible. Are there others?" Margaret's face immediately brightened. "There's Diana, a single mother who was living in her car with her 8-year-old daughter. She was trying to apply for emergency housing assistance, but the online systems were confusing and she didn't understand the documentation requirements." Ellen felt her heart constricting at the image of a mother and child living in a car. "I helped her gather the necessary documents, fill out the applications, and even accompanied her to appointments when she was too intimidated to go alone. Diana and her daughter have been in their own apartment for 6 months now." "Margaret, how long have you been doing this?" "About 4 years, since I started volunteering at the library. I began noticing people who seemed lost or frustrated with the computers, and I started offering help. It grew from there." Ellen stood up and walked to her desk, returning with a folder that her producers had somehow managed to compile during their conversation. "Margaret, while we've been talking, my team has been making some calls. Do you know that you're well known throughout the LA homeless services community?" Margaret looked surprised. "Really?" Ellen opened the folder. We contacted several homeless services organizations, and they all know about the Library Angel. That's what people call you." Margaret's eyes widened with surprise and emotion. Ellen began reading from her notes. "This is from the LA Homeless Services Authority. Margaret Phillips has become an essential bridge between homeless individuals and the services they need. Her work at the Central Library has helped more people access housing and benefits than many formal programs." She flipped to another page. "And this from the Downtown Mission. Margaret has referred dozens of people to our services, but more importantly, she prepares them for success by helping them understand what to expect and how to navigate the system." Margaret was listening with tears forming in her eyes. Ellen continued, "But the most remarkable statistic we found is this. Over 4 years, you've provided intensive assistance to over 300 homeless individuals, and according to the organizations they've connected with, over 60% have achieved stable housing." Margaret gasped. 60%? I knew I was helping people, but I didn't realize the success rate was so high. Margaret, that's an extraordinary outcome. Most formal programs struggle to achieve those kinds of results. Ellen sat back down. "What do you think makes your approach so effective?" Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I think it's because I meet people where they are, literally and figuratively. I don't require them to come to an office or fill out forms to get help. They're already at the library for their own reasons, so I can offer assistance without making them feel like they're asking for charity." That's a really important distinction. Exactly. And I have time to really listen, to understand their specific situation and what barriers they're facing. Sometimes what looks like a housing problem is actually a documentation problem, or what seems like an employment issue is really about transportation or childcare. Ellen felt her admiration growing. "Margaret, tell me about a typical day at the library." "I arrive at 9 a.m. and check in with the regular staff. Then I walk through the library, looking for people who seem to need assistance. Maybe someone has been staring at a computer screen for an hour without typing anything, or someone is holding a stack of papers and looking confused." Margaret's passion for her work was evident as she continued. "I approach gently, offer help, and if they're interested, I sit with them and figure out what they're trying to accomplish. Sometimes it's as simple as helping them create an email account. Sometimes it's as complex as appealing a denied disability claim." "How do people react when you offer help?" "Most are grateful but cautious at first. They've often been disappointed by systems and people before, but when they see that I'm patient, that I'll stick with them through the process, that I don't judge their situation, they open up." Ellen stood up again. "Margaret, I want you to meet some people." From the wings of the stage walked a group that made Margaret's face immediately light up with recognition and joy, people of various ages and backgrounds, but all carrying themselves with the grateful dignity of those who had been helped through difficult transitions. "Margaret, these are some of the people whose lives you've changed over the past 4 years, Ellen announced. The first to reach her was a man in his 50s wearing a work uniform who immediately embraced Margaret with obvious emotion. "Margaret, it's Robert. I wanted to show you my employee badge from the hardware store." Margaret hugged him tightly, tears flowing freely. "Robert, you look so healthy and confident. How's the apartment?" "Perfect. And I just got promoted to assistant manager. None of this would have happened without you helping me navigate the VA system and teaching me how to apply for jobs online." A young woman with a child stepped forward next. "Margaret, it's Diana and Emma. Emma's doing great in her new school." Margaret knelt down to greet the 8-year-old girl, who shyly hugged this woman who had helped her and her mother find stability. Diana addressed the studio audience. "Margaret didn't just help me fill out paperwork. She came with me to appointments, helped me understand my rights, and taught me how to advocate for myself and my daughter." One by one, people shared their stories with Margaret. Veterans who had accessed benefits, families who had found housing, individuals who had secured employment, all because they had encountered Margaret during their darkest moments at the library. But Ellen had arranged something that would show Margaret the even broader impact of her work. "Margaret, these people represent just a portion of those you've helped, but there's something else you should know." Ellen walked over to her desk and returned with more papers. "We contacted the LA Public Library System and city officials, and they shared some remarkable information about the Central Library." Margaret looked curious and slightly apprehensive. Ellen began reading. "This is from the chief librarian. Since Margaret Phillips began her volunteer work, the Central Library has become the most effective access point for homeless services in downtown LA. We have people traveling from across the county specifically to get Margaret's assistance. She flipped to another page, and this from the Mayor's Office of Homelessness Prevention. Margaret's work represents a revolutionary model of service delivery. She's proven that meeting people where they are, rather than requiring them to navigate complex bureaucratic systems, dramatically improves outcomes. Margaret was staring at Ellen in amazement. The mayor's office knows about what I do? Margaret, you've accidentally created a new model for homeless services that city officials want to replicate throughout LA. Ellen handed Margaret one of the documents. This is a proposal from the LA Public Library Board. They want to hire you as the city's first library-based social services coordinator. Margaret was reading the document with tears streaming down her face. But Ellen had more surprises. Margaret, there's someone else who wants to meet you. From the audience stood a distinguished woman in a business suit who walked onto the stage. Margaret, this is Dr. Sarah Chen, Director of Social Services for the City of Los Angeles, Ellen said as the woman approached. Dr. Chen sat down with Ellen and Margaret. Margaret, what you've accomplished at the Central Library has caught the attention of social services administrators nationwide. You've proven that accessibility and dignity are crucial components of effective service delivery. Margaret looked stunned to be meeting such a high-ranking city official. We'd like to offer you a position creating and managing library-based social services throughout the LA library system, Dr. Chen continued. You would train other volunteers and staff members in your methods and establish similar programs at libraries throughout the city. Ellen watched this conversation with growing excitement. The position comes with a full salary, benefits, and a budget to expand your model to all 85 LA public library branches, Dr. Chen explained. We estimate that your approach could help thousands of people annually access the services they need to achieve stability. Margaret stared at Dr. Chen. You want me to teach other people how to do what I do? Margaret, what you've developed through compassion and innovation represents the future of social services delivery. We want to support you in scaling it up to help vulnerable populations throughout Los Angeles. Ellen couldn't contain her excitement. Margaret, do you understand what's happening? Your volunteer work at one library is becoming official city policy for homeless services throughout the entire LA library system. Margaret looked around at all the people who had come to thank her, at Dr. Chen, at Ellen, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered. I just wanted to help people who seemed lost, Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ellen stood up and made a statement that would encapsulate everything Margaret's story represented. Margaret Phillips thought she was a retired teacher who volunteered at a library, but what she actually is a social services innovator who proved that the most effective help happens when we meet people where they are, treat them with dignity, and provide the patient individualized support they need to navigate complex systems. But Ellen had one final revelation that would show Margaret the true legacy of her work. Margaret, there's one more person I want you to meet. A young man in his 20s stepped forward from the group of visitors, approaching with obvious emotion and purpose. Margaret, I'm David Martinez. You might not remember me, but you changed my family's life 2 years ago. Margaret looked at David carefully, trying to place him. My father Carlos was homeless for 18 months after he lost his job and couldn't pay rent. My family was scattered. My mom and I were staying with relatives. My younger brother was in foster care temporarily. Dad was living in his car and too proud to ask for help. David's voice grew stronger as he continued. Dad started going to the library just to escape the heat and cold. You noticed him struggling with online job applications and offered to help. Margaret's eyes began to fill with tears as she started to remember Carlos. But you didn't just help him apply for jobs, you helped him understand that losing his home didn't make him less worthy of respect and assistance. You connected him with mental health services, helped him access emergency housing assistance, and supported him through the process of getting our family back together. David turned to address the studio audience. Margaret didn't just help my father find a job and housing. She helped him rebuild his sense of dignity and hope. Because of her, our family is whole again. He turned back to Margaret. But here's the most important part. Watching how you helped my father inspired me to change my career path. I was studying business, but I switched to social work because I saw how one person's compassion could transform multiple lives. Margaret was sobbing now, overwhelmed by learning how her library assistance had influenced someone's entire career direction. Ellen felt tears streaming down her own face. Margaret, do you understand what David is telling us? Your help didn't just assist his father, It inspired a future social worker who will spend his career helping other families in crisis. David added, "Margaret, you taught me that social services isn't about bureaucracy and paperwork. It's about seeing people as human beings with dignity and potential, regardless of their current circumstances." Ellen addressed the studio audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're witnessing is the true power of meeting people where they are with compassion and practical support." Margaret thought she was helping individuals navigate systems, but she was actually demonstrating how social services should work, with dignity, patience, and individualized attention. She turned to Margaret one final time. "Margaret, you've proven that retirement doesn't mean the end of your teaching career. You just found a new classroom, the public library, and a new curriculum, helping people rebuild their lives one form, one application, one moment of human connection at a time." As the show wrapped up, Margaret was surrounded by the people whose lives she had changed, the officials who wanted to replicate her work, and David, whose career path had been shaped by witnessing Margaret's dedication to serving vulnerable community members. 6 months later, the library-based social services program had been launched at 15 LA library branches, with plans to expand to all locations within 2 years. Margaret worked with library staff and volunteers to establish similar programs, training them in her methods of respectful, patient, individualized assistance. David Martinez had indeed continued his social work studies and was completing an internship with the city's Homeless Services Department, where he was researching the effectiveness of library-based service delivery models. And every day when Margaret went to work coordinating social services throughout the library system, she carried with her the knowledge that her simple desire to help confused library visitors had grown into a comprehensive approach to making essential services accessible and dignified for everyone who needed them. Because Margaret had learned something that changed how she thought about education and service, that the most important teaching doesn't always happen in classrooms, but wherever a patient teacher meets someone ready to learn, whether that's a child learning to read or an adult learning to navigate the systems that can help them rebuild their life. And sometimes the most powerful lesson is simply showing someone that they deserve help, respect, and the chance to try again.